Okay, welcome back. We are going to continue with our study of the most amazing structure in space to prove irrefutably the existence of a creator God. And we discussed the discovery of Margaret Geller and John Huchra back in the 1990s. And this is a problem that was irrefutable. And basically, it's a complete conflict with the fact that the cosmic background radiation is completely random. Yet these objects in space, known as galaxies, in these particular examples, have huge voids, which is inconsistent with the smooth background radiation, and not only inconsistent that way, but that there are structures that are obviously not random. These are not by accident. These are in these positions. So we're going to dive a little deeper into the literature about this, which is in a summary that I've written, and I'll give you references and stuff that you can verify all this as well. And so please enjoy. I hope you'll find this very interesting, entertaining, and very compelling at the same time. Okay, so this is an article I wrote some years ago, and actually nothing has changed since the last observations by the scientists, and we'll get into what that's their final conclusion is. It's too big to be explained by anything like cold dark matter or something that you can't see that's physical doing this, making this structure. So they're stumped, and they allude to what the big question is, and we'll get to that later. So between 1985 and 1988, the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, known as CFA, and you'll see that on some maps sometimes, CFA2 and things like that. This is Gellner and Huchra, made a major discovery of a large-scale structure in space. They started a 3D map by looking directly overhead over the northern hemisphere of Earth. There they stumbled across a structure 500 million light-years across and millions of light-years thick. It is called the Great Wall. It was the largest structure ever discovered in space at that time. What they observed was a, quote, strange, distinct pattern, end of quote, when examined in three-dimensional space of a stick man in 3D. And we showed you what that is. They dubbed it at first as the Great Wall. This is in the article by Chaikin, Great Wall of the Cosmos, Omni, 1991. They never doubted, quote, the structure was real, but painstaking analysis demonstrated that this was so. So they made sure they proved it was actually real. After they concluded the image of the human was real, they dubbed the structure the homunculus. The structure had the shape of a human with head, limbs, and torso within a bowl-like structure with smooth edges on all sides and empty voids all around. This large 3D form of a human being can only be seen when observation spans about 500 million light-years across, about 1% of the sky. The homunculus form in 3D is most astounding when seen demonstrated by computer recreations on PBS astronomers, which we will be seeing later. This homunculus, this little human, is not an illusion, but a real 3D version of a human head, two arms, a torso, and two legs. Margaret Geller, when interviewed on astronomers, explained that it is a, quote, a striking resemblance to a human life form. Gellner and Huchra explained the Great Wall in more detail in Mapping the Universe, Science Magazine, November 17, 1989 at 897. I'm going to refer to that article numerous times. So just if you need to know the footnote, if I reference the page number and it's up in the 890s or 900, that will be this article. The human figure in the Great Wall is reproduced in Figure 3b and 3c to their article. It appears in more glossy form in an Astronomy magazine of April 1993 at 4445. Then this was the topic of a discussion by Ian Stewart and Martin Golubitsky in Fearful Symmetry 1992, where they described the Great Wall of Gellner and Huchra. In a universe that should be random, there should always be the same density of galaxies in any region of space. However, computer analysis of surveys of galaxies carried out in the mid-1980s by Margaret Geller and John Huchra show in the Great Wall they collect together in vast filaments and sheets. Subsequent work has confirmed their findings. They announced the discovery of the largest coherent structure ever observed, a Great Wall of galaxies 500 million light-years long. The reason for this is far from being understood. I'm going to pause for a minute. Okay, so what he's saying is that the universe should be random, but it turns out it isn't. Not in this sample we're looking at in the Gellner-Huchra region, the region of the Great Wall. And then he's saying it's the largest coherent structure, meaning coherent, meaning it has the sensibility of being one unit, being a coherent, intelligible structure. But the reason why it's not matching the background radiation is far from being understood. So there is a mystery that they claim they don't see what the answer is to. That's fine, because they're supposed to try to find scientific answers, and that's actually what we want too. If they can't find it, and they've done everything they can, and they cannot find it, that's your evidence that there is no naturalistic or evolutionary type explanation that even makes any sense. Okay, so we'll stop there. So let's look at what is the hurdle they have to explain. They have to explain honeycombs. So that's the best thing I'm going to tell you. Soapsuds have the same characteristic of what we're going to look at, is having a hexagon shape geometrically internally. So that's what soapsuds are. There's little hexagons in there. Same thing, honeycombs, and that's the same thing that they're observing in these points or nodes of there's spiral galaxies that serve as nodes of all the portions of the homunculus. It's all made of, its structure is made of hexagons in 3 dimensions, forming small groups of hexagons on top of hexagons, just like soap bubbles, okay? So it just keeps branching out, and it creates this image of the arms, legs, torso, and head, and so on. So let's listen to what, this is Gellner and Huchra in their 1991 article, Mapping the Universe, Bubbles, in a book called Bubbles, Voids, and Bumps in Time, The New Cosmology, at page 50 and 63. They say this: geometric structures in this great wall are, quote, in almost any slice. It is like, quote, taking a slice through the soap suds in your kitchen sink. Make the slice thin compared with the diameter of the typical bubble. The surface of the bubbles, the films of soap, would outline a pattern very much like the one defined by the galaxies. So if you were to cut into soap suds, it's like cutting through a hexagon, and you would see the same image inside of if you cut a slice out of the Great Wall homunculus. So they say other familiar structures like this are the honeycombs, and sponges have similar geometries. So in the Great Wall, the sheets run all the way across the survey and are the surfaces of several adjacent bubbles. So just like the honeycomb has little hexagons, one after the other next to each other, and they form a structure, it's exactly what she's saying. It's the same thing. Soaps have had the same structure. Sponges have the same structure. Honeycombs have the same structure. And if you look at this book by Huntley, The Divine Proportion, A Study in Mathematical Beauty, 1970, page 118, he says, a honeycomb is a non-random structure. Mathematicians reveal it is comprised of conjoined hexagons. So that's exactly what we're seeing in the hand, the torso, the head, the arms, the chest, everything of this homunculus is built of hexagons, where the shape of the hexagon at every node, just like in a geometric shape, to show a hexagon, you would have to have 6. How many sides is that? 6-sided, I think it is. You'd have to have 6 edges that all have the nodes of each edge as a spiral galaxy, and that's what you're observing. Okay, and this article by Gonick in Science Classics, Discover Magazine, 1994-80s, explains honeybees shape their honeycombs into, quote, 3-dimensional hexagonal cells of equal areas, so it, quote, stores honey using the least possible amount of beeswax. Okay, so their design, the honeycomb, is an ideal design for using the least amount of space to store something. So, but the honeycombs in space, these spiral galaxies forming these nodes of hexagons that are all conjoined one after the other, there is nothing. They're not containing anything. It is a completely arbitrary system, which means somebody out of just pure beauty or elegance is deciding to do this. It has some beauty or attraction to the creator of this. It has no purpose in space to hold beeswax, but there it is. It's a shape that would hold beeswax if it could, or contain bubble soap for a while or whatever. So it's miraculous. That's what it is. Let's just call it what it is. So John Huchra in the next quote is going to put his finger right on the problem. Why is the cosmic background radiation completely random throughout the universe, and yet we find these structures that are completely coherent, intelligible, true structures, not phantom structures, not an accident. They're non-random. What can explain them in relation to what is provable to be a completely random expansion of the universe by looking at the cosmic background radiation? How do we put these two together? And he actually says he thinks there's a missing link, and he wants to find the answer. So I just think it's important to see how he's right up against the wall on the biggest issue of life, is where do these things come from? I mean, these are huge structures. Where did they come from? Versus we have proof that the universe is completely expanded in a completely random way due to the cosmic background radiation.
To make a truly three-dimensional map, Gellner and Huchra have obtained the distance from Earth for more than 11,000 galaxies. For each galaxy, the process begins with a trip to the basement of the Center for Astrophysics. They find each galaxy to be plotted on a two-dimensional photograph of the sky. On these negative pictures, galaxies and stars appear as dark dots on a light background.
956 plus 1927. 956 plus 1537.
The overlay provides the name or number of the individual galaxy and its location in the sky. Huchra takes a series of photographs of small regions of the sky survey. At the observatory, these photographs will be used to identify the galaxies seen with the telescope. Like other astronomers, Huchra hopes to resolve the apparent contradiction between the patterns of galaxies and the smoothness of the early universe revealed by the background radiation.
The data that exists in a lot of different forms, cosmic background radiation, the galaxy distribution, everything all like that, are not particularly doing very well with respect to one another. There's something that's missing from the way we see the universe. And I suppose my hope as an individual is that by making observations, maybe we'll find the missing link, the key that will allow us to unlock this puzzle.
Okay, on this next slide, we're going to have a short video from Margaret Gellner, where she's going to talk about the homunculus. Involves galaxies that are not randomly distributed and have a remarkable pattern, and she'll explain herself. Of a remarkable pattern of a little man. That's the way she described it.
After selecting an area of the sky to map, they draw an imaginary slice or wedge starting from the Earth. The slice reaches hundreds of millions of light years into space, large enough to contain thousands of galaxies. Gellner and Huchra use their distance measurements to build a three-dimensional picture of how the galaxies are distributed in the slice.
When we had finished the first slice, we saw a remarkable pattern, which looks like this. And what are we looking at here? Well, our strip across the sky runs like this. And we sit here on the Earth, and we look out 450 million light years into the universe. And each of these points represents a galaxy comparable with the Milky Way. So each of these points, each of these 1,100 points, is a galaxy containing billions and billions of stars.
The first slice of the sky, made in 1985, surprised astronomers with its complex patterns and unusual shapes.
Now, you can see that there's a remarkable pattern in this plot that the galaxies aren't just randomly distributed. It's a pattern you can look away from and remember. In fact, many people describe it as being a little man. You can see his torso here and his legs. But more generally, what you see is that there are regions where there are very few, if any, galaxies like this, and we call these voids. And these are huge dark regions, 150 million light years across, and there are thin structures where the galaxies lie. And you can see that you see these apparently coherent structures which thread all the way across the survey. And when we map other slices, we can map slices to the north and south of this. We see this structure again and again and again. So it turns out that it's a huge sheet, and it's the structure we call the Great Wall.
And in this next slide, we're going to see Margaret Gellner explaining more that these, like the man, the homunculus, he's actually thin. He's very wide, but he's thin. He's like a sheet standing there, but he's very wide. You know, the arms are stretched out, the legs are stretched out. He's high, and he has all the proportions of a human being, in other words, and that's what's kind of strange about him. And she's going to talk about the anomaly this represents in terms of the Big Bang. You've got the cosmic background radiation, everything we think is smooth. The evidence proves it's still smooth. All the background radiation continues to be random, completely random. So why is there such a large irregularity? And that's just it's a nice word, because it's really more than just an irregularity. It's a freakish example of designs that's sitting in the middle of the sky, in our northern sky. That's what it really is. Okay, so here, let's hear what she says.
During a tutorial, Margaret Gellner explains the map to a group of Harvard students.
So now what we're going to do is build up the survey slice by slice and just stop when you think the structure matches.
A student brings the second slice down on the computer screen. All the slices show the immense patterns of galaxies that surround nearly empty regions of space, hundreds of millions of light years across.
And what you see is that there are very large regions which are dark, and that the galaxies are in thin structures which surround or nearly surround them.
What unknown forces in the early universe could have created these vast structures?
The problem with these patterns is that they're enormous. So the universe now has large irregularities, very large irregularities, much larger than people had expected. And we think we know that early on the universe was very smooth.
Okay, next we're going to read something from Margaret Gellner about bubbles, bubble foam, as an analogy to what we're seeing in the in the homunculus. And I'm going to show you how that is really relating again to the concept of hexagons. And just to show you something that's interesting, look at a hexagon in the dragon eye. Does that look does that look like a chance event there that ended up just happening by accident there? And he sees through each one of those little hexagons. He's got an amazing eyesight. And but you know, this thing in the sky should actually put everyone to shame. Is like, if you can't see a design in the eye of a little dragonfly, you know, you may not see the most amazing thing in the sky. I mean, that's how I think there's going to be a few people say, well, you know, if this can evolve, then the thing in the sky, I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, I guess it's big, it's bizarre to have, you know, all spiral galaxies forming in hexagons, but you know what? Stranger things have happened. I mean, literally, that's how some people are going to respond. But I pray you won't do that, because it's not sensible. It's not rational. Okay. So anyway, we're going to proceed forward and see what she's going to talk about: bubble foam or bubbles. Okay, but before we hear her on bubble foam, we wanted to get an article on an article from ZME Science, the hexagon shape and why it shows up so much in nature, and that's where I got that hexagon eyes from ZME Science. And it actually mentions bubble foam as a place where you might not expect there are hexagons, but there are. In fact, if we move away from the biological world for a moment, we find the exact same rule. There's a physical rule governing something completely different: bubble foam. Although bubble foam remains notoriously hard to solve mathematically, figure out why this happens. Foam is known to often tend to form hexagonal shapes. In this case, it's about finding the structure that has the lowest total surface tension, which means the least area of soap film wall. So it's basically a physical mechanical thing that it just has to form these things in order to reach this point. And that shape happens to be the hexagon. But of course, when we're looking at hexagons in separate spiral galaxies filling up all these nodes, there's absolutely no necessity for that any one of them to just, why it could just spin away if it wants to. I mean, you know, right? There's nothing gluing it to there unless there's some other controlling decision or force or design to it that could keep it in this position. It doesn't have the same physical properties that make bubble soap be hexagonal. Okay, so I think we've seen the main point I wanted to bring out. I just want to highlight a couple of other things that they talked about. Gellner and Huchra said that when they map these features in 3 dimensions, they say they are approximately spherical and symmetric. So again, you wouldn't expect in random space that you would have spherical structures of the galaxies themselves. You know, so you might say a spiral galaxy would be spherical, but why would a hexagon of spiral galaxies have a spherical shape? In other words, you could put a circle, you could put the hexagon inside of a circle. That's the relationship of the nodes, and so it has a spherical property, she's saying. And what this means is, she's saying, or Gellner is saying, it's a structure, it's not an illusion, it is coherent. It's designed to be, and these objects, this is what it was meant to look like. She then points out the fingers object does not change over huge 3D expanses of space, up to 10 megaparsecs. So it's a consistency where however far out it grows, however deep she keeps going, it just simply continues to be the same shape. So it's not something that's fading like, you know, sunset fades into a sunset and goes away. This thing is exactly the shape it's meant to be. And as she says, let me pause this here. I'm having trouble. Okay, there we go. Gellner and Huchra then point out the figure in 3B of their diagram to their article, which is the most human-looking slice, has, quote, many thin structures that run at arbitrary angles with respect to the line of sight. So what she's saying is arbitrary doesn't make sense. It means that it depends upon choice or discretion. So the angles are not random. They're designed to match a certain shape. And so that's how you can get a homunculus out of stars and galaxy systems all conjoined in this major structure. Now, just another observation in another cluster, apparently similar but maybe not as complex, who knows, Jack Burns said that the chance it was simply random coincidences that galaxies could come together like this, and instead of being an underlying structure, so something purely of chance, not a structure, meaning made, intended, is 1 chance in a million. J. Burns, Very Large Structures in the Universe, Scientific American, Volume 25 at 30, page 38, July 1986. So that's pretty awesome stuff. Hold on, we're going to stop for a minute and we'll come back. Okay, so another fact here is Gellner and Huchra explain that within the Great Wall, what comprises the homunculus are hexagon patterns of spiral galaxies. They found, quote, thin sheets of galaxies wrapped around vast holes almost devoid of galaxies. So these were the spiral galaxies coming around. Margaret Gellner of Harvard explained these shapes, quote, look like a kitchen sink full of soap bubbles, meaning they were hexagons. Hold on. I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, and Chaikin, in his article for Omni, August 1991, interviewed Gellner and Huchra. Chaikin explained their discovery. Similarly, they found in the Great Wall that the galaxies were formed in, in amazingly thin, quote, amazingly thin, well-defined surfaces wrapped around enormous bubble-like voids measuring up to 200 million light years across. To Gellner, the pattern, quote, resembled soap bubbles in a kitchen sink or perhaps a sponge. Sponge also has vacuoles, like a hexagon vacuoles. And William Hartman, in his textbook Astronomy Cosmic Journey, actually had some diagrams that showed the hexagons and showed the spiral galaxies at each of the nodes. And that was 1991 at page 594. And he described it as: we can map the position galaxies in three-dimensional space by measuring their redshifts. And such mapping, this is the Great Wall he's talking about, the homunculus. Such mapping of about 5,800 galaxies out to about 150 megaparsecs reveals that galaxies and clusters of galaxies are distributed as if on the surface of vast bubbles. Again, just like the hexagons of a honeycomb, enclosing the galaxy-free voids, which he also says is comparable to a honeycomb shape. The large-scale structure of the universe resembles a froth of soap suds, where galaxies are like water molecules on the surface of the touching bubbles, and clusters or superclusters are like the nodes at the junction of the several bubbles. So again, bubbles on bubbles have sort of a connection to each other, so they're linked with each other, just as these nodes of the hexagon spiral galaxy nodes of all these hexagons that are like a honeycomb are all wedged together to fit into a series. Hold on, I have something more here, I think. Okay. So maybe this one. Burns says these observations had led investigators to propose a bubble theory of the universe, according to which galaxies and clusters actually form the surfaces of giant bubble-like structures, or you could say honeycomb, if you want. The largest bubble would have a diameter comparable to the void found in 1981 by Kirshner. This was Scientific American, July 1986, at page 40. Okay, and if you study water or foam, you'd learn that there's the reason it forms not honeycombs, but hexagons, has to do with its trapping of gas bubbles by film liquid, such as water filled with soap provides, and then the bubble forms a thick, contiguous liquid film of 0.01 millimeters in width, and it's mechanically fragile. Now, these honeycombs, or excuse me, these hexagons of these spiral galaxies are formed in such a way that they're not connected by any kind of contiguous liquid. So they must be held in place by some means. And I think we started earlier and showed you that gravity cannot explain why they're staying in these shapes and maintaining these characteristics. Okay, I'm going to pause it one more time and just see if I got anything else here. Okay, and the only theory that had been proposed was by Jeremiah Ostraker from Princeton, was that there was some sort of cold dark matter that was perhaps causing basically something you cannot see is causing these things to stay in connection with each other and maintain structure. Doesn't explain how it caused in the first place, but it would maybe explain how it was staying together. But eventually, he himself conceded that this theory, quote, cannot account for, quote, bubbles the size of the ones in the Gellner survey, in Margaret Geller's survey. So that's not going to work either. So nothing really works, and just simply explaining it the way they do, that there's a bubbles and honeycombs, is just a way of saying we don't know how it's caused, but it is pretty remarkable. And I think this is another concession that there's something big here, but and a very big thing, and yet you don't hear anything about it anymore. And I think that's deliberate, and I don't mean conspiratorially deliberate, but it's like, if it's pointing to God, that's not our job. It's the theologians should come in here and say, hey, this is impossibly something that cannot have been caused by nature. We're looking at a miracle is what we're looking at. We're looking at the most powerful UFO culture created something where you can pull in galaxies and literally clean out all the stars in that area and create a huge void, and then just draw something beautiful in the middle of it that's elegant and gorgeous. Anyway, but I just wanted to read this. Richard Talcott, in his article, Everything You Want to Know About the Big Bang, says these large-scale structures of the universe, as well as the galaxies and the clusters in them, are, quote, one of the major mysteries of modern cosmology. One of the major mysteries. So there is something unanswered when this happened, when this came out. It doesn't fit a Big Bang. That doesn't mean Big Bang didn't happen. It means something intervened in time to create something that cannot be explained by chance, by the explosive force of the expansion of the universe. It just doesn't. Should have been totally random. Should have been, distributed stars. Should have been distributed. If it's galaxies, it should have been distributed evenly with galaxies in different places. But now you have these huge voids, and you have structures, and you have appearance of objects, and they're not just any object. It's a picture of us. We're looking in a mirror. Somebody is maybe trying to tell us something, maybe a message. I created you. Could that be what it is? It's like a big sign in the sky saying, pay attention to me. I made you. This is what I can do. I can take all the star systems from this area. I can put it together in one place. And I can create a structure that you can't ever explain in a billion, no matter how many billions of years. You could imagine go ahead, guess 250 billion years. Guess 500 billion years. It's never going to happen by chance. Nothing like this can form. Use your brains. Gravity is not holding this together. It's my law, my spirit, my control. That's why it's happening, just like it is true for your orbits in your own solar system. And by the way, notice the similarity between the two. So I've already covered our solar system should, with more than 4 planets or more, all the studies show that the rules only work, the rules of gravity only hold together 3 planets. But once you have 4 or more in our solar system, they should all fly off, and they'd be out of control because they interact with one another. And really, if you look at this homunculus, it should, because of all the interaction, the connection with all these other galaxies in these close proximities, there should be some sort of distortion or falling away and flying off into the distance, because the gravity repulsive force of gravity is also operating on this group, or it would collapse in or something. But it's so stable and it's so fixed and it's so geometric that that can't be the possible explanation. What is the explanation of a geometric honeycomb in space shaped like a man, with hands, arms, torso, head? What explains that, ladies and gentlemen? Can you think what else could explain it other than God and a miracle? No, there is nothing. And that's why it's not paid attention to. Not because they don't want to help bring out theism, but they've exhausted all possibilities, and they know there's no answer but God. So why you can't give that as a scientist? You'd be delegitimized. You'd be kicked out of the club. And maybe within their system of ethics, they're not allowed to even say God's the explanation, right? They're not even allowed to suggest that's the solution, even when it's the most obvious of all. Even when a culture maybe 300 years ago, the scientists would have said, of course, we've exhausted all possibilities. It only has one answer. It's obvious. We don't have to even debate it anymore. It's just, it is what it is. God's created something, and it's here. It's a reminder. It's over our heads. It's a picture of us. He loves us. He designed us. And he's just saying hello. It's a nice hello kind of picture for us to look up and admire and look at his handiwork and see how wonderful and beautiful it is. Is that what it is? Yes, I think that's what it is. So I don't think it's a conspiracy. It's just it's just outside their ethics to explain the solution. It has only one answer. Okay, I hope everyone, this was edifying and brought something to your attention that you might want to share with a friend or something. And this is a problem that can't go away, will never go away, because it can't be solved by science. Cannot find an answer other than a creator. And so, and that's in their school of thought, you cannot mention that cause anymore. So, but we can. So at this channel, we can mention the obvious. Okay, God bless. Take care, everyone. Ciao. Bye.